You know what nobody tells you about the people who refuse to give up? Most of them aren't fearless. They're terrified. They've just learned to move anyway. They feel the burn in their legs at mile 20, just like everyone else. They hear the same voice in their head whispering, "Stop. This is enough. No one would blame you." And then they take one more step. Not because they don't feel pain, but because somewhere along the way, their mind learned to treat that voice as noise instead of an order. And here's the psychological paradox sitting at the center of this. The very wiring that lets someone push through agony, ignore exhaustion, and outlast people far more talented than them is the same wiring that can quietly cost them their health, their relationships, and their sense of rest. Today, we're going to explore the psychology of athletes who never quit. What's actually happening inside their brain when everything tells them to stop? Why this pattern develops? And what it really reveals about who they are. Let's start with what scientists actually call this. Researchers studying elite performance refer to it as mental toughness. But the more precise term they use is self-regulation under duress. The ability to keep behavior aligned with a goal, even when the body is screaming for relief. Studies from the University College London and Stanford have repeatedly shown that the athletes who never quit aren't simply gifted with stronger muscles or bigger lungs. In many cases, their physical ceiling is no higher than their competitors. What separates them is something happening above the neck. Their brains are exceptionally good at one specific task, overriding the signal to stop. The body sends the alarm. Most people obey it. These people negotiate with it. The difference isn't the pain, it's what the mind decides to do the moment the pain arrives. Neurologically, this comes down to a quiet tug-of-war between two regions you should know about. The first is the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain that monitors effort and conflict. It's the structure that lights up the instant your body says, "This is too much." The second is the prefrontal cortex, the seat of willpower, planning, and self-control. In people who never quit, the prefrontal cortex stays dominant precisely when the alarm is loudest. While most brains let the distress signal take the wheel, theirs keep a hand on it. The pain still registers, fully, sharply, completely, but it doesn't get to make the decision. The result is a mind that can hold a goal in one hand and agony in the other, and still keep walking forward. What's fascinating is that this pattern almost never begins on a field or in a gym. For a large number of these athletes, the wiring is laid down in childhood, often in environments where giving up simply wasn't an option. When a child grows up needing to prove their worth through performance, or in a home where comfort had to be earned rather than given, the young nervous system learns a very logical rule. Don't stop. Don't show weakness. If you keep going, maybe you'll finally be enough. The refusal to quit, in this light, isn't just discipline. It's an adaptation, a very intelligent survival strategy that turns struggle into safety and effort into identity. The athlete who can't quit was very often a child who learned, early, that stopping felt more dangerous than suffering. Now here's something worth pausing on. Not all of this drive looks the same, and the difference matters more than almost anything else about it. Psychologists generally separate it into two distinct types. The first is adaptive perseverance. The athlete pushes hard, but they push towards something. They can read their own body, distinguish productive discomfort from genuine danger, and choose to continue from a place of clarity. This version, when balanced, is one of the most powerful psychological assets a human being can have. It's linked to resilience, long careers, and a deep, quiet confidence that doesn't need an audience. The second type is compulsive persistence, a more punishing pattern where stopping feels intolerable, where rest triggers guilt, and where the athlete keeps going not toward a goal, but away from a fear. This is where the gift starts to cost them, in overtraining, in injuries played through until they become permanent, in a sense of self so fused with performance that a single bad day feels like a verdict on their entire worth. The tricky thing is that most of these athletes live somewhere between the two. A moment of healthy drive can slide almost invisibly into compulsion. And because the pushing feels noble, because effort is the most celebrated thing in all of sport, it can be genuinely difficult to notice when you've crossed from discipline into self-harm. Sports psychologists describe this as the discipline illusion. The mind feels like it's being strong when it's actually being scared. The behavior looks identical from the outside. A person training at 5 a.m. with a fever could be the picture of dedication, or someone who is terrified of what it would mean to stay in bed. Only the internal motive tells you which. And this is where dopamine enters the picture. Your brain releases dopamine not when you achieve a goal, but in pursuit of it, during the chase, the grind, the next rep. So for an athlete who never quits, the act of pushing through pain becomes its own chemical reward. The brain learns to associate suffering with the promise of relief and recognition that follows it. Over time, the struggle itself becomes the thing the brain craves. This is why telling a driven athlete to just take a rest day is neurologically naive. You're not asking them to relax. You're asking them to give up a reward their brain has been wired to chase for years. Rest doesn't feel like rest to them. It feels like withdrawal. So what does this whole pattern actually reveal about a person? Here's what the research suggests, and it might not be what you'd expect. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology found that athletes scoring highest on measures of perseverance also scored significantly higher on emotional regulation, the ability to stay calm, focused, and functional under intense pressure. They tend to be, on average, more composed in crisis, more able to delay gratification, more capable of holding a long-term vision when everyone around them is reacting to the moment. The very engine that lets them ignore the voice telling them to quit is the same engine that lets them stay steady when life falls apart. These are often the people you want beside you in the hardest rooms, because they have spent years training a single muscle the rest of us neglect: the ability to keep going when feeling says don't. But persistence without permission to stop is its own kind of prison, and that's the tension these athletes live inside. They can endure almost anything. They can outlast, outwork, and outsuffer nearly everyone they meet. And yet the one skill that would set them free, the ability to stop without it meaning something is wrong with them, is often the one they never learned. Because here's the quiet truth the psychology keeps returning to. The strength to never quit and the wisdom to know when to rest are not the same strength. One is built in childhood out of fear. The other has to be built later, on purpose, out of trust. And many athletes spend their entire careers mastering the first while never touching the second. Sports psychologists who work with these athletes often focus not on weakening their drive, but on changing its source. The goal isn't to make someone quit. It's to help them push from a place of choice instead of a place of fear. One framework they use teaches athletes to separate the thought from the command, to notice the urge to keep going without automatically obeying it. Instead of, I have to keep going or I'm weak, the reframe becomes, my body is asking for rest, and I get to decide what that means. It's a subtle shift, but a genuinely powerful one. One keeps the fear in charge. The other hands the wheel back to the person. And for someone who has spent their whole life unable to stop, that fraction of distance can be the difference between a long career and a broken one. What all of this points to is something that reaches far beyond sport. The refusal to quit is not a character flaw, and it's not blind stubbornness. It is, at its core, a remarkably disciplined mind that learned to keep moving in a world that once felt unsafe to stop in. The challenge isn't to kill that drive. The drive is a gift. It builds champions, survivors, and people who finish what they start. The challenge is to teach that mind, gently and with patience, that its worth was never actually tied to the next rep, that it is allowed to rest, that stopping, sometimes, is not surrender, it's strategy. And maybe that's the most human thing about all of this. We tend to admire the people who never quit without ever asking what taught them they couldn't. The endurance we applaud on the outside was often forged by something painful on the inside. Understanding that doesn't take the strength away. It just gives the person holding it a choice they never had before. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person who never quits will ever do is learn, finally, that they're allowed to stop. Because real strength was never just about how long you can keep going. It was always about knowing why you're still running.